little boy. Yes, I'm going to stream now. I should be live. I know, Vader. Alright. Let me know if you guys can hear me and see me. You don't count, you're on the couch. YouTube, you're live on your channel. Yay! And it's gonna take a minute for people to be notified. So, yes, you can. Excellent. I'm assuming you can also hear Vader. Oh, you're all... Oh my gosh, Vader. Vader's been outside and he is soaking wet again. Why do you want to go out in the rain, silly boy? Jeez. Alright, I'm gonna make chat bigger. Alright, so we have... Wood Spirit, hello to Australia. That's far. Is it? Are you staying up late to watch this?
They're 8 hours ahead, so it's about 10.
Yeah, it's late there. Hi Steven, hello Sue, hello Woosie, and Amelia, and Shonda, and Shirley, and Anna, and Majid, and Sue. Wait, I said Sue. Hello everybody. Unusual for a cat to want to get wet like that. I know, Amelia, it's crazy because he freaks out when I like spritz him with water, but yet he'll walk outside in the rain. What's up? He's currently pacing back and forth because it started pouring out and he doesn't want to go out in the pouring rain. He can handle the mist. Loud little boy. Hello, pink flamingo. Oh, you're all wet, Vader. At least wet cats don't stink like wet dogs. Hello, Bartolo. Hello, Yasmin. You probably can't really see him against my black shirt. He's like a shadow. Sweet little boy. Don't be meowing the whole time. Ugh, now I have like wet cat hair all over me. Perfect timing for stream. Oh, and he just went outside. He's gonna get soaked. He just loves being outside and he hasn't experienced too many pouring wet days yet, so he like doesn't know how to handle it. Okay, so I need you guys to let me know, first of all, can you hear the music and is it too loud? Secondly, I need you to vote on which painting we're going to paint today. So in chat, I'm going to put a little link. If I can figure out how to type, that's useful. It should pop up in a second. So the link that I'm going to share with you is a voting poll. So I need you to click on that and vote for which one of these you want to paint. And once we decide, I will get the actual reference photo and we'll start painting together. So I painted these over the last couple days. Music is audible and could be turned a tiny nudge down. Okay, that's fine. 1 second. It might also be certain songs are louder than others. Just spilled my water jar all over my toilet paper after filling it up. Oh no. Woozy. I'm sorry. I'm laughing. I'm picturing it. Let's see. Okay, I'm hoping that music is okay now. The link won't work for you. Is it working for everyone else? Or is it broken? Toilet paper is more precious than Arch's paper. Oh my gosh. Worked for you. Okay, it's working. You were able to vote. Okay. Maybe just try clicking it one more time, and if that doesn't work, I haven't voted yet, so if you really need me to, you can tell me which one you want and I'll vote for you. I'm only allowed to vote once, so, you know, you gotta... I'll do that for someone who's having trouble with the link. My gosh, guys. I am so sick of video editing. I've been editing nonstop for like 3 days solid. Not only for YouTube stuff, but also for this other Skillshare class I just posted. And it's about painting mountains. But it's something that people on Skillshare said that they would find really useful. So it's a beginner watercolor class about mountains. It's mostly, it's like you could apply the stuff in the class towards any subject, but I chose mountains because because I talked about it in the rock tutorial. I am tired, but it's fine. It's okay. It's mostly just like my muscles up here and my arm and my shoulders really hurt from sitting at this desk and editing for hours and hours and hours. But after today, I won't really need to do a lot of editing for a few days at least, so I get to take a little break. Hey, Tony. Done voting. Sometimes straw poll doesn't work in some browsers. Oh, really? Hey, Koparka. Yeah, that's not so surprising. I'm not sure how advanced it is, but so far the voting goes like this. This is winning. Top right is winning, followed by top left, then bottom left, then bottom right. Poor bottom right painting. Nobody loves you. Well, one person loves you. I can understand though, because it's a very subtle painting. It's like a very, very crazy bright light palette, like a pastel palette. These ones are more dramatic and more contrasted. Oh, hey cats. Hey Anna. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to try to remember that. So I'll give you guys 3 more minutes to vote. You are the ones deciding our fate. You're early. You're making the decision for the rest of the stream. You're tempted to vote on the one on the bottom left. This one. This is a St. Mary's Glacier in Colorado. It's this really amazing mountain lake with a big glacier that I guess is technically... It's not an actual glacier. They call it something else. But the place is called St. Mary's Glacier. And it kind of sits in between those 2 peaks. In the winter, it's like all snow. But I went there a few summers ago, and this is what it was like in the summer. And this one is Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. I went there with my brother one year, and we were hiking around, and when I took the reference photo for this painting, which is currently winning in the straw poll, it was sunset and we were being chased by swarms of mosquitoes. It was horrible. I brought my paint stuff with me that day because I was like, yes, we're going to the mountains. I'm gonna paint outside. It's gonna be amazing. And oh my gosh, I could barely stop to take a photo Like I was like walking and taking photos at the same time because as soon as you stopped moving, the mosquitoes would just swarm you and just attack you. It was awful. And this one is painted at Maroon Bells in Colorado. It's another amazing place near Aspen, Colorado. It's very, very iconic. Like tons of photographers take the same exact photo of this place, and it's like the peaks in the distance between, and there's like green valleys, and it's really gorgeous. Yeah, and this is a mountain in Colorado that it's like a zoomed in view of from one of the hikes I did. All right. YouTube doesn't let you change your name. Oh. I confused left and right again. Wait. Let me just scroll up and make sure I didn't miss anything. So, I'm looking at the poll results. This one is still winning. It's still winning. And followed closely by this one. I have a feeling the top right is going to be the winner because it's 4 points ahead of the others. You know, it's kind of hard to catch up at this point. And it is officially 3 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is grab the reference photo for you guys. We're officially going to paint this one because it's 3. We're making the cutoff. And let me grab that reference photo for you. Let's see, we are... Where are we? What is happening? Who knows? Ah, there we go. All right. I will add it to... One second, guys. I'll add this to the command. Oops. Reference. Today's reference. Okay, that should work now. I'm trying to fix the music. Okay, so that should work. I'm gonna type it in. The bot is slightly delayed. There we go. So that new link in the reference command, the gouache link there, should show you which one we're painting. And I'm also going to pull it up on my iPad. So this is the Rocky Mountain National Park, the one I told you where we were being swarmed by mosquitoes. This was actually on the way in to the hike. We ended up hiking over to those mountains and there was this amazing waterfall, and on the way back it was sunset, and that's when we got attacked by the mosquitoes. So I'm gonna put these aside. And I think I'm going to use this paper and I'm going to cut this page in half, or I'm going to put tape in the middle of this one. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much cat hair, you guys. Alright, so what we need to do before we get started is get our paper ready. So if you are using loose sheets of paper, you might want to tape down your page to something flat, like your table or a board. And in most cases, what I do is put tape along the entire edge and make sure it's nice and like secure on all sides. That way your paper, once you get it really wet, it's not going to buckle as much. However, some heavier papers like the 300 GSM paper, which is what a lot of people use for watercolor paper, it doesn't always buckle. So, you know, it just depends. I'm using a paper block, which means the paper is attached, it's all glued together on all the different sides. So it doesn't buckle. It's very, very convenient. Vader's sing-along. I know, he's so loud. But I'm going to use half of my page, so I'm going to put tape along along this part. Hopefully that's straight. Vader, please. Sheesh. No. Shush. Wait. Sake. You know, that's gonna drive me crazy if it's not straight, so I'm gonna make sure it is straight by doing this. There. Now there is no question. So there's here's the example painting. Is that too dark? I might have to turn the camera darkness down. I might have to turn the brightness down just a little for when we get started, because when we're starting off, we're going to use really, really light colors. Oh my gosh. Camera, focus. Okay. I mean, I'll zoom in as well, but so just before we start, actually, let me back up. First of all, welcome to Paintalong number 47, which is going to be all about Watercolor Mountains. Huge, huge, huge thank you to my Patreons, who are the reason we're doing this. They're the reason we do this every month. You guys are amazing, especially for supporting me during this crazy time. It means the world to me, and hopefully you guys enjoy these paint-alongs. We'll just keep doing them each month, every time we hit that goal, which we've been doing for many, many, many months. What I like to ask before we start painting is who is painting with me. I'd like to get an idea of just like who in chat is going to be joining in. So if you are painting with me, please press 1 in chat. And I know everyone is also setting up, so I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm always just really, really curious. And if you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask in chat. You can tag my name, you can do the little @ symbol and then my name, my username, and it will highlight my name for me, so that is easier for me to catch. Yay, we have lots of people joining in. It's a nice rainy afternoon here, perfect for painting. And after this, for those of you who, for my Twitch subscribers and Patreons, we're going to do a movie night after this. We're going to watch, what the heck? We're going to watch The Hobbit. Oh, that noise. Did you guys hear that noise? That was an Etsy sale, apparently. It's like, cha-ching. Thank you, whoever you are, if you're watching. Let me turn my sound off on my phone because that was really distracting. Cha-ching! That was interesting timing. Anyways, what were we saying? Painting, yes. Today we're going to be painting mountains. I'm going to be doing this scene, and if you need the reference photo for this still, type !ref in chat and that will pop up for you. I have my iPad with the photo on it right next to me, so this is what I'll be referencing as well. And I'll quickly go through, I'll quickly run through all the steps that we're going to do today, and then we'll start painting. Okay, Tony, good luck with whatever you're doing. We'll see you later. Yeah, I guess I'll use this as a reference. So, a couple things. First, we are going to sketch our mountain and some of the trees and the river outline. So we're just going to do really light lines and just sketch in the major shapes of these things. But I'm going to be using a very light blue pencil. I'm hoping it'll show up just fine for you guys on stream, but I'll zoom in on that just in case. So after we draw that in, we're going to start with painting our sky. Then we'll work our way forward. So we'll go from this background mountain to these foreground mountains. Then we'll start touching in our green and our trees, and we'll paint the water, and these trees will be last most likely. So we're just going to like work our way forward in little steps. And along the way, I'll tell you what colors I'm using, and if I can think of any useful tips like how to use your brush or tell you what I'm doing, I will do that. But to get started, I want you to pull up that reference photo, the one that keeps popping up in chat. It's working, Wood Spirit. It's slightly delayed, but it's there. You just posted it 3 times. So pull up that reference photo, and it's going to we're going to use that as our guide for drawing in our mountain shapes. So, I mean, I have this already drawn as my already painted as my example, so we can reference that as well. But when we start off, I need this to be like right here, just so the camera knows what to focus on. When we're starting off, I'm going to be using this light blue pencil, and it's going to be really light, but basically I'm going to just do the outline shape of my mountains. So when I'm doing the mountains, I'm thinking about the overall composition, and I'm thinking I need enough room for my river, and I need enough room for the peaks of my mountains, or like the tops. I don't want them to be flying off the top of the page, so I need a little bit of sky above this one, and I need to make sure I give myself enough room for this river to like snake through there. So what I try to think about first is, where's my horizon line, or like am I looking at it from down low? Am I looking down on the valley from up high? And just try to pinpoint that straight away. And then I can go from there. So in this case, I'm going to kind of go make my center line, my horizon line kind of right below the center line of the paper. And then so if we think the paper's cut in half, or actually, let me draw this so you can see the bottom edge of so you can actually see where this ends. So this is the space I'm working in, this square. If my horizon line is here, or if the center of my paper is here, I'm gonna start it slightly below that. Van life, very limited space. Hello, inappropriate artist. I remember your comment. Van life sounds so cool. I would love to have a old van that I could turn into like a mobile studio. Welcome, Alice. Welcome to your first Paintalong. We're just getting started. If you guys want to join in, we're going to start with our sketch. Oh my gosh, Vader is going to drive me crazy. So I'm going to start my mountains just below the center line and work my way up here, leaving a little area up here for the sky. And you can see in the reference photo, the tops of these mountains are quite jagged, or at least the top left mountain is. So it kind of is slightly flatter on the top, and then it kind of falls really steeply down like that. So let me zoom in. So it's a little bit flatter up here, and then it has this like big cliff face there. And then it slowly slopes that way. And the one in the distance does not come up above that peak. It's slightly below it. So I'm going to start it about there, and it'll subtly roll over this way. I know it's really light. I'll try to darken my lines for you guys. And just an FYI, I mentioned this when I first started the stream. If you guys are really into painting mountains, but you feel like today's paint-along is maybe going too fast, or, you know, if you ever feel like you need more help with mountains, watercolor mountains, that is, I just posted another like mini Skillshare class. It's only like 35-40 minutes, all about painting mountains. I show you how to paint this scene in watercolor, and I talk about like tons of different stuff that's helpful for beginner watercolors, and that's over on Skillshare, which you could use my link to get 2 months free. So, you know, you can watch the tutorial for free technically, and I'm hoping that it'll help if you're just starting off. And then those slopes, so the mountains kind of like do this thing where they kind of slope down into this valley. So these lines lead down this way, and this line leads down this way. Supporting your rock class. I'm so happy for both being able to. Gino, thank you. I appreciate so many of you guys joined Skillshare and started watching my class, and it's just really awesome to see the communities mixing, and I really appreciate that support. Beginning to wish I'd watched the rock class. It's never too late, Steven. It'll be there forever, you know. It's on there. Now you have 2 classes you can watch over there. Okay, so at the base of this mountain here, this is what I'm going to call my foreground mountain, because it's technically sitting slightly in front of these guys over here. In the reference photo, I didn't want to draw, so you can see in the reference here. Look at all these little like mounds of stone sticking up out of the trees. I wanted to simplify that. I didn't want to have like so many different mounds. So what I did is took some artistic liberty, and I made a couple prominent areas of stone that are sticking out of the trees, but very simplified. So, I mean, if you look, this is like a 4x6 piece of paper. It's really small. So when you're working small, it's harder to add more detail. And if you want it to read well, a lot of times you'll be simplifying a lot of elements. So if you're doing a little bit of a smaller piece, feel free to simplify those areas. And as long as you have a few of those stones peeking through the trees, I feel like you'll give the impression of all of those of the stone of the forest kind of gradually growing up around those rocks, which in the end is the important part. And then you can also see that I simplified all the tree areas. So I have like blurry trees in the background, a couple more prominent treetops here, some more treetops, a little more detailed trees in the foreground, but all of these areas we are going to be simplifying a lot. And that's okay. There's still ways to make it interesting. So in this case, when I'm drawing it in, I'm starting to think about that, and I'm not adding every single, you know, chunk of rock or every single tree, just kind of getting an idea. Let me darken. Oh my God. Sorry, I'm going to darken it again just so you can see the lines a little bit easier. But one of the most important things we need to focus on now is where our light source is. So in this case, I'm envisioning the light is coming from the right side. So the sun is pouring down into the valley this way. So all of the cliff faces and the mountain sides that are facing the right side are going to be in light, and the left side are going to be in shadow. So you can see, okay, first, who can tell? Someone, I want you guys to tell me if you could tell straight away. But I actually painted the shadows onto this mountain. So all of these chunks of shadow, this area, all of these areas, these little guys here, and like this whole shadow area here, that's a layer I added in Procreate over the original photo because I was not impressed by the lighting in the original photo. It was so over illuminated that there were not any interesting shadows. So that's another trick you can do if you have a reference photo that you are interested in, but it doesn't really, something isn't popping out to you like it should. Feel free to adjust it in digital software if you have that, or just in your mind if you need to. And I can actually show you an example. So this is another example of a photo that I was like, yeah, it's cool, but like I don't like the shadows, or there are not enough shadows. So I took it into Procreate and I did the same thing. So if you look at this area and this area and this area, compared to this one, which is just all white, it's just bright sun on bright snow, that to me is much more interesting. So it's something that I do quite a bit. If I need to, I will make the photo work for me. I've also photo bashed photos together to create my own reference photo out of multiple photos. So this is how this part in shadow on these left sides, I'm gonna draw those in as just like big areas of, and I can, if I want to, I can even like fill them in like this because I'm using such a light pencil. I'll even draw in like hatch lines like that just to remind myself that that's a shadow spot. So if you need to, that is another helpful thing you can do. I don't do that anywhere that it's going to be like very, very light paint, but it's fine if it's on an area that's going to be in more dark shadow. Okay, there's a little bit of some shadow up here on these cliffs, on the left side of some of those peaks, or some of those vertical cliff faces, and on the left side of these big boulders. So it's up to you guys to figure out how much shadow you want to add, if you want them to be more bright. These background mountains are going to be much lighter than the foreground mountains. And then when it comes to adding the river, what I like to do first is just draw like a natural curve in my... So this kind of thing is actually great for like leading the eye through the painting. So if you look at this, this line of the mountain leads the eye in, and then this curve of the water is going to also drag the eye around the painting. So you can either enter the painting through the river and go up to the mountains, or you can like start in the mountains and snake your way down to the river. So depending on how you color it and what lighting you use, you can really help direct the eye through the painting. And as the river gets close to you, it gets a lot wider, so it starts really skinny and then it kind of opens up towards the viewer. You can even have like a little riverbank, a little lip falling down into the water there. All right, and then lastly, I'll just do a couple like squiggle lines, as I call them, for the treetops. So this part, there's one lone tree standing right about here, which I really like. I think that's kind of cool. If you want, you can add more trees there, but I want to make sure I get that tree in there. And in order to make the scale work, we need to make sure that tree goes up over the horizon line. If we draw this tree, so if I had drawn this tree down here and it had not gone up over that horizon line in the center, it would have made it look like we're above the tree, above the valley, looking down at it. But if we're in front of this tree, kind of aligned with it, and we're looking straight at it, it goes above our horizon line. So that's one way you can get a sense of scale or add a sense of scale to your paintings. So having elements in the foreground that go over the background elements and up over your vanishing line or your horizon lines really, really helps with that. It makes you feel like you're like standing there in the scene amongst the trees. So yeah, these foreground trees over here are going to be a little bit taller and go up across that. I'm not going to draw like every single one in. I'm just getting a couple of the peaks. Like this is an example of what I do just to get an idea of where the trees are going to be. So just basically drawing the tops of them. And it just reminds me that that's where they're going. All right, we're almost ready. We have some trees back here as well. Oh, and here's a really simplified tree line. So this little tree behind, these tree lines behind there are literally just zigzags. They kind of slope up that mountain, but we can do that with color as well. And there's a few clusters back here among these rocks. Again, it just depends on how much, like how big your painting is. If you only have a 4x6 space, or even like this is pretty small, this is, you can pack a decent amount of detail into a small painting like this, but you definitely need to simplify. There are exceptions. There's this artist named Dina Brodsky, I think her last name is, who does tiny, I'm talking like tiny, extremely like hyper realistic paintings, and they're incredible. And her brushes that she uses are like 2 hairs, and she does oil paintings. They're gorgeous. So yes, it is possible to get a lot of detail in a small space. But for a paint-along like today, I don't want us to be here for 8 hours. Spare you. All right, are you guys ready to start painting? I'm not sure how long that's gonna take you to draw in your stuff, so just let me know when you're ready. Try. Oh, it's so bright. It's really hard to show this pencil line, this pencil sketch. You can kind of see there, I added in my little squiggles for my trees. And, oh man, the camera can barely focus on it because it's so light. You ready? Need some palette tips. Palette tips, like as in what colors to use. We are about to get into all of that. If it's your first paint along with me, I will just quickly show you what I use, but it's pretty straightforward. I feel like it's nothing out of the ordinary. I have a variety of brushes like this. So these are the styles of brush that I am going to be using for this painting. They're basically all round, considered round brushes. This one, this tiny one on the end, is a script brush. But they're just different sizes. This is this bigger one is a number 12, and then it goes down to like 8, and then 2, I don't know, 4, something really small. And basically the bigger areas I'll use the bigger brushes, and then when we get into the tiny areas I'll switch to the smaller brushes. This is my color palette. This is my palette. And gotta pause for a bit. We'll be back. Okay. I'll just be going through a couple things really quick. So for my color palette today, I'm using my new earth-friendly palette that I've been working on. And while I'm going through the paint along, I'll try to just use like, you know, common terms like warm green, cool green, all of that kind of stuff, so it's a little easier to follow. But if you if you do want to know, my blues are, I'm going to be mostly using my ultramarine finest, which is a standard ultramarine color. And I'm also going to be using, for greens, I'm going to be using my diopside green, which is a very deep grassy green. It's gorgeous. And you can either use a light warm green or add yellow to that and it'll become a warm green. I just have like a regular Hansa yellow there. And for my brownish tones, I'm going to be using any of these, which are Perylene Violet. It's like a deep reddish violet color. And my quinacridone burnt orange, which is a nice bright, rich, rusty orange color. My yellow ochre, which is a more subdued orangey yellow color. It's gorgeous though. And I'll try to, as I go, I'll explain if I'm mixing anything custom. I'll just let you guys know what that is. I may also use my neutral tin. I still haven't removed this from my palette because it's just been on there since I started in 2016 and I love it. So I might use that here and there, but I'll let you know. For some of the like cooler tones in the blue and the greens, I might also use phthalo green, which is a really cool but vibrant green. And I would mix that with one of my darker greens or my blues and just kind of bring it down a little bit. But as I said, since I like to cater this towards beginners, I will definitely use more simplified terms like light blue, dark blue, warm green, cool green, okay? And if you have any questions, ask. Don't hesitate to ask. And for water, I use a dual bucket thing. It has like a divider down the center. So if you have two sources of water, it's ideal because you can keep one side clean and one side to wash your dirty brushes with. And it just helps a little bit with reducing the cross-contamination. I also have some salt. It's a salt grinder. So once in a while, in order to get some really nice textures, actually I can show you with one of these. In order to get some nice textures, I will use salt, like here, for example. So this is how it looks when it dries in watercolor. It looks very, very textured, and it's honestly perfect for getting like fields of grass or fields of wildflowers and stuff like that. It just has that perfect look, and you can combine it with little scratches and other things that I'll show you to get a nice variety of texture. Instead of just having like a big solid area of green, you can do something like this, which will just add to the interest a little bit more. Vader just came back in and he's all wet, licking his wet fur. You use 2 large yogurt containers. That's a really good idea. Yeah, you can use whatever. Make it easy. Make it cheap. And of course we want a paper towel because a lot of times we will be like dabbing the paper to pick up paint, or if you accidentally make a mistake, this is really handy. Just want one of those right next to you. I also suggest having a little sheet of scrap paper nearby if you can, because sometimes it's good to test your colors before you touch it onto your actual painting to make sure you have the right tint or the right darkness. So I'm going to put that one there. Okay. Pickle jars and cottage cheese containers. Excellent. All right, I am going to start off with the sky. And in the reference photo, it's a pure blue, like just straight up blue sky, nothing interesting there. In my little test painting, which I know is very, very light, you can kind of see I added some streaks of cloud in there, just kind of leaning down this way, which is just one of those things, artistic license. You can make your own judgments if you want to add clouds into it. I'll show you. I'll be adding a couple like wispy clouds into mine, so I'll show you how I'm going to do that. But if you want to make it simple for yourself, you could just fill in this top area, the sky, with pure blue. And just to start off, what I like to do, I have a bottle of water somewhere. I will use my little spray bottle and I'll spritz along my watercolors to soften them up a bit. And sometimes I do like 2 or 3 coatings just to make sure it's nice and soft. You can also drip paint like this into it if you don't feel like you're getting enough. And then, of course, you risk dripping on your actual painting. So be careful if you're doing that. All right, for the beginning of this, what brand am I using? Well, they're all different brands. They're more than half of these are Schmincke colors because I just love their colors so much. I also have a couple Daniel Smith and a couple Winsor Newton. How long will this be up? I can't paint right now, but I would love to watch later. Data's Kitchen. I am going to be, after the live paintalongs are over, the link gets shared to my Patreons and my Twitch subscribers. So if you can't watch live, really the only way you can watch it is by either joining Patreon or being a Twitch subscriber. But it's just my way of thanking all of them for their support. Like, I'm more than happy to do this for free live. I always have fun with it, but that's just one of the things. But, you know, at this point, since I've been doing it for over 4 years, there are over 45 full-length tutorials for only $5 on Patreon, so it's a pretty good deal still. What do you think about Mission Gold? I haven't tried it. I've heard so much about it. Grumbacher Finest, they're amazing. They're on Jerry's. I've also heard of them and I haven't tried those. I've used quite a few, like Sennelier, Daniel Smith, Schmincke, Winsor Newton, both professional and the Cotman brand, Van Gogh. I've tried a bunch of different ones, but there's still quite a few that I would love to. Oh, and I have my one M-gram color is the yellow, is the Hansa yellow, and I actually love it because it's so easy to re-wet. They use like honey in their paints and they're just so nice to work with. Holbein. I don't have any Holbein. Do I? I don't have any Holbein watercolors. I have quite a few, almost all Holbein gouache though. Oh, I was gonna say, when we're starting off, I usually like to clean out my center area, my mixing area. What are you doing? Don't tease him. He was being quiet. Turner is another one I haven't tried yet that I want to. Oh my gosh, you guys. Yesterday I was watching the premiere of the Mind of Watercolor YouTube artist. That's his name of his YouTube, The Mind of Watercolor. He revealed his custom personalized Daniel Smith palette. So he worked with Daniel Smith to make a Steve's palette. It's so cool. And I just thought that was such an amazing accomplishment, and because I love his channel, I love his work, he deserves it so much. And so many of the colors on there were gorgeous, and I was like, oh my god, that's so tempting. But I can't get it because I'm in Europe, unfortunately. But you can go on there. If you're in Europe like me, you can go look at the list of colors they have and find them in actual tubes and buy it elsewhere, like from somewhere in Europe. We are trailing off a bit. Sorry, I know. I just get really excited about talking about colors. All right. When I am starting out, I like to pre-mix a couple piles. If I'm doing big wet into wet areas, like I do really enjoy mixing my colors on the actual paper because it gives me some really cool effects. But if I'm doing a big area, a big wash, it's so convenient to have a pre-mixed pile. So in this case, I'm going to fill in the sky color, and I'm going to pre-mix my blue. So I'm going to use my ultramarine. And because I want it to be a very bright, sunny day, I'm going to add a little bit of my phthalo turquoise, or my phthalo sapphire, which is a bright phthalo blue. It just gives it a little pop of color. It reminds me of that Colorado blue sky, which I love so much and I miss. This probably isn't enough for my sky, so I will add a little water and get a little more. And then we're gonna get started. So in order to get a nice sharp line against my mountain range, I'm going to point the tip towards my mountain. So I'm turning my paper to the side. I'll zoom out so you can see. I turn the paper to the side and I just start lining that mountain. And if you're using 100% cotton paper, it's nice because it gives you a little extra time to work with it. And keep going back and reloading your brush as you need it. And I'm using Saunders Bockingford rough paper, so this is actually rough paper. Maybe that surprises you guys because I always use Arches cold press. But I had this out for my mountain Skillshare class, so I decided to just keep going with it. And that's that. You don't want it to be dripping, you don't want it to be running off the page at this point. Just fill it in with a nice big blue mass of color, and then as it starts drying, if you would like to add just a teeny bit of cloud, like wispy clouds, get your brush clean, get some clear water on it, but not too much water, just a little bit. I even wipe off the excess drips, and we can start picking up some of that pigment. So I'm just sweeping my clean brush through that sky and picking it up a little bit here and there. A lot of times what I love about mountains, mountain clouds or clouds that form around mountains, are that they kind of look like they're flowing off the tops of the mountains. And that's it. I'm actually going to stop there. I don't want that to be distracting. I just want it to be kind of subtle up there in the distance. So we'll let that go. That music was getting a little weird, like lullaby-ish. Sorry, just catching up with chat. It will go up as a tutorial, that's why we can't converse as much. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you come hang out during my normal live streams, we chat like crazy. Like, I'll just ramble on forever. I'm sorry, guys. But for the Paintalongs, we usually try to keep it on topic, keep it going, keep it moving, because everyone who's watching later after the fact is suffering through my rambling. Okay. Apparently I like to splash my paper as I lift my brush. So I'm just letting this sit for a second so it dries, because in order for us to do the mountains, we need the sky to be totally dry. If the sky is wet, once we start doing our mountains, it's going to bleed up into the sky and ruin it. So we don't want that. But while we are waiting, we can do other parts of the painting that's not touching the sky. So for instance, I can add in some color in my water. In this case, it's going to be reflecting the sky. The reference photo is a little bit odd because it was a photo I took with my phone, and it was using the HDR setting because it was such weird lighting that day. And the water is just, in my opinion, in the reference photo, the water looks very strange and not really appealing. So I, in my little sample painting here that I showed you earlier, I filled it in with a lot of blue, similar to the sky, except a little bit darker. And then I came back in and picked up some of that paint with my paper towel. And I did little teeny streaks of another color later that I can show you. So it's a lot different than the reference photo, and I'm going to stick with this strategy because I just think it's better. You tagged your fingernail through the sky. That will make an interesting streak. Oh, yeah. I've done that before. Yeah, sometimes I forget that like one area is wet, and I'll hold my painting with my thumb or something on that actual wet area, and then when I lift it off, I have a big spot on the edge of my paper, and I'm like, no, because at that point it's dry and there's nothing I can do about it. Corvulus, hello. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm going to start touching in color into my water, which is going to be pretty simple. Oops, I already messed up. Okay, so I'm basically just dragging my brush, a thin line up here, and then it gets a little bit more thick down here. It's a very dry brush. I barely have any water on it, just to give it a very light splash of color. And then I'll come back in with just a hint of more blue in some spots, especially under that bank of grass. We want it to be a little bit darker. And as that's drying, I will take my crumpled up paper towel and I'll just touch in a couple spots here and there. But the cool thing about this is your paper is most paper is quite forgiving, so we can come back and we can keep adding and removing as it's drying until we get it to our liking. But we can also come back and do another layer later. This is just a very light layer to start off, just to get us going. And because I am impatient and I don't like waiting around for ages. If you go over the edge of any of your lines on accident, you can always just take a clean brush and sweep it across and then use your paper towel to pick up the rest. My paper is actually drying quite fast. I think this paper dries quicker than my Arches cold press. Squeaky chair. Hey Kimberly, good to see you. We just started if you want to jump in and join us. Okay. As I said, I'll tell you our strategy for the mountains next. So you've probably heard me talk about this many times in the past, but there's this thing called atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective. And that's just that really interesting phenomenon that happens in nature where all the things that are far away from us appear much lighter, less saturated, and depending on the lighting situation of that day, they can be all sorts of different colors. But in this case, in a bright, sunny, blue sky day, there is lots of blue bouncing around and reflecting off of those particles and moisture in the air and pollution or whatever. And it's making everything that's further away from us appear a little bit more blue. So it's less warm, it's less saturated, it's less contrasty, and it's a little bit more blue. So in this case, we can kind of use a bluish tint in our pigment or in our mixes when we're doing our distant mountains. And as we get closer and closer, so as we step closer and closer and closer to the foreground, we'll add in a little bit more warmth with each mix. So in this case, this background mountain, it does have like a hint of warm gray to it, but but overall it's much lighter and not as contrasted. And we'll use light colors to start off because you can always add more later. It's much easier to add more later instead of taking it away because you did too much. So we'll do that with each mountain as we move forward. And also, as we get to this mountain and this mountain, we will start, like, as this is drying, we'll start adding in the green for our forest that's like climbing up the mountain, because we want it to kind of fade off into that mountain. We don't want it to be like such a hard edge of a forest there. Because it's in the distance, it's a little bit more blurry. We can't quite see everything that's in focus. So by doing the wet into wet thing with our trees, we kind of give that illusion that things are just blurring and fading off into the distance. And then we can come back and put the hard edges of our forest in front of those. Does that sound like a plan? Hope that was understandable. Sometimes when I'm explaining these things, I'm like, oh God. So if your sky is not dry yet, you can wait, or you can go get a blow dryer or a heat gun and speed up the process by heating it so it dries. I'm gonna turn the focus on. Oh wait, no, I'm not. Why doesn't it focus? It's so confused. It's probably because I don't have a lot of paint on my canvas. So what we're gonna do is zoom in, and I'm gonna turn it on manual. Hopefully that's in focus though. It looks like it is on my OBS, so we'll go with that. This is where having a test sheet of paper is going to come in really handy, because when we're trying to get these light steps in, you know, having that gradation effect of our mountains going furthest away from us, like being a little faded and then getting warmer and more and darker and stuff in the foreground, we can like test a little color and set it there just for a second and see if that'll work for us, and then continue on with the painting. So for a warmish gray tone, what I'm gonna use is, it's actually gonna lean a little bit towards purple, because again, in the reference photo, I'm not overly excited about the color palette there. It's like all of it is just tinted way too bluish green for me. So I'm gonna adjust a little bit myself. So what I'm gonna do is my Perylene Violet, which is like that deep reddish violet color. But you could use any red or purple just to start off. And I'm going to add in a hint of yellow ochre just to warm it up a bit. And then a tiny bit of blue, which is my ultramarine. So it's kind of a warm purple. And that's going to be my shadow tone for my distant mountains. So I am leaning a little bit more towards purple in my shadows in this case. In the furthest mountain away from us, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards blue. So what I'll usually do is like pick up a little of that and then tint it with more blue. So kind of like this. And then when I get to the next closest mountain, I'll do a little bit less blue and more of this. And when I get to the next closest mountain, I'll use only this color. And then in the closest mountain, this brighter one over here, I will add in even more saturation than I did before of that same color. So you get that like gradual step forward. You know what I mean? Did that make sense? I hope that made sense. So again, we can test. I like that. It's very, very light. So as I said, I would prefer to start off lighter rather than go too dark at the beginning. So yeah, that works for me. It's very similar to our sky color, except mine has just like a hint of purple in it. And I'm pretty much only doing the shadows at this point. So I'm only focusing on those shadow areas I drew in, like that. This is different than a mountain with snow on it. If we were doing a snowy mountain, I would be explaining things a little bit differently, but you know, in this case, we have some bright summery mountains. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that distant. Makes dollars to you, okay? That distant mountain. The shadows in that distant mountain, I mean. And I'll sometimes come back in with a clean, I'll clean my brush off and get some clear water and like soften some of those shadow edges here and there. And I can use that to drag some of that color around and dilute it just a little bit. Soften it. But seriously, less is more when we're starting off. We don't want to go too crazy with saturation until we get a good feel for how the values are working in our painting. I am using a silver black velvet brush. This is a number 12. It's one of the first ones I ever bought I was in an art store in Denver, and I asked the lady there what a good brush is, and she told me this one. I was like, okay, and I bought it, and I'm so glad I did, because although nowadays if I'm going to buy a brush, I don't buy a brush with animal hair. This is a synthetic / natural hair brush with, I think, squirrel hair, and it's one of the top recommended brushes for watercolorists. I didn't know that at the time, but it has served me very well over the years. It's been with me since 2016, and I've actually had to paint over this part with black nail polish a few times because it started cracking. The bottom is all painted over, but it has been amazing over the years. I have an extra point. It has a very, very fine point. I actually think it's getting a little bit duller these days because it's being worn down, but it still gets me like some nice fine points. And then once I get past the point of this being useful, I switch to my smaller brushes like these because they're very, very fine and I could get lots of detail. But this is good for like the bigger areas. It holds a lot of water and pigment, which is so useful. I am going to switch to my little brush though, because there's a little bit less work area here that I can work within. Yeah, so next, shadow. So this one that's slightly in front of that background mountain, I'm going just a hint darker. So I'm pre-mixing some of that. And this time I'm going to use a little bit less blue. So as I step forward, it's getting less blue. And again, I can test it if I need to make sure that's a little bit better. Just an FYI, depending on what colors you're using, what pigments, your watercolors will experience a color shift, so they won't be as saturated or as dark when they dry. So if you don't know, if you're not familiar with your colors, I highly recommend doing a color swatch chart and just a cheat sheet that shows you what they look like when they dry, because sometimes it can be a huge hassle when you take so much effort to color mix and like lay all the paint down, and it dries so light. I started to learn that the hard way with my colors, because my blues do experience quite a big color shift. Okay, and then again, as I get closer to the foreground, so this mountain that's in front of this one, I'm coming back in with my shadow tone. Oh, and I'll mention, yes, we're doing the shadows now, but we will come back and do some more color on the face of these mountains later after it dries. Oh, I almost forgot. With this one, I'm just gonna get a clean brush and I'm gonna blur some of these lines just a little bit, because I don't want them all to be so focus. I don't want them to be have such like a hard edge. Okay. And moving on. So this one again is going to be the same colors mixed together, except this time it's a little bit more saturated, a little bit less blue. So if you want, you can stick with the blue color palette thing. Like the reference photo is quite blue, quite dramatic bluish green color palette. But if you prefer something a little bit less monotone, you can do what I'm doing now, which is to kind of vary your tints and make it, I don't know. I don't want to say one is more interesting than the other, but you can match your aesthetic, your preferences. As I mentioned, when we're getting into these mountains, this left one and this right one that's in the foreground or closer to us, I'll start touching in some green at the base of them. So any area that I'm working on down here, I'm gonna add in a little green, and it's my grassy green color, my kind of a deep green, but it's not like a phthalo green or anything like that. This is diopside green by Daniel Smith, and I'm just letting it blur into that shadow. And I'll just fade that up to the left. And I'm just cleaning my brush off and getting a couple soft edges on these shadow lines. This is, my Perylene Violet is a very staining color, so if I let it dry on the paper, it's pretty much gonna stay where I put it, even if I want to come back and like lift it up. So I have to either work really quick or like make that decision really quick, or even just use a paper towel like right after I put it down. Are you guys okay? Are you doing okay on your own paintings? While I'm waiting for that side to dry, I'm going to work a little bit on the shadows on this side. And I'm using the same tone I used over here because they're kind of aligned, although this one on the left is slightly forward, or at least I see it that way. So in this case, on this side, things are a little bit different because we have these big cliff faces. So I'm using more of a vertical, shadowy style to indicate that those sheer cliffs just kind of like drop down. In the reference photo, there are trees up there, but I want it to be a little bit more dramatic. I want this top part to be kind of barren. And then as you see here, the trees start about this area. This is such a different like style or way of painting than my expressive tutorial stuff, or the last couple paintalongs we've done are the expressive style, so it's kind of working fast and loose and all sorts of different mark making techniques, whereas this is much more like slow and every little mark is thought out. I mean, you can still incorporate some expressive stuff into it, but yeah, it's just kind of different pace. But I think this is relaxing. These boulders, or whatever you want to call them in the foreground, have a shadow on the left side as well. Definitely should have done the rock tutorial first. Oh, Steven! No, I hope that you're able to enjoy it though. Wait, wrong way. I'm trying to see if I can get the lighting better. It's so hard. It's either like too bright or too dark. I'll keep it on the brighter side just so it's easier to see though. Alright, where are we at? I think my mountains are probably dry enough. Okay, so for the space that we have right now that's all white, we can, if you want to keep it really simple, you could just leave it white and it would still probably work. But I'm gonna add a hint of color to these mountains back here, the faces that are open still. They are still going to be pretty much the lightest thing in the painting, except the sky and the water, but I want to add a hint of color to them so they're not just white. So I'm going to use a kind of grayed warm color. Basically, if you left any area of your mountain white, it's either going to come across to the viewer as being snowy, which is okay, or just that there is such a bright sun reflecting off that rock that it's glaringly, it's just like a pure glare. And what? Don't look at me. I know I'm stuttering.
Pure glare, by the way.
But it's okay if you want those things to happen in your painting. That's fine. But if you wanted to kind of subdue that just a little bit, what I'm gonna do is add so I have my orange color, which is my quinacridone burnt orange. Just mixing like a very light version of this, very diluted with lots of water. And a hint of that ultramarine, and it's gonna give me like a really warm gray color as long as I lean it towards the ultramarine or towards the orange. And there's a couple different ways you could do it. You can either try to keep this color inside your white areas, which is quite difficult to do, or you can, because it's such a light glaze, it's such a light wash of color, you can actually just paint over everything you just did. And it's going to slightly darken your shadows because it's paint on top of paint. It's going to give everything a warm tint. But you can only do this if your paint is totally dry. If it's not dry yet, it's gonna, everything you touch is gonna bleed everywhere, and it's gonna be crazy and chaotic and probably turn into a muddy mess. But mine is so light. It's like such a light glaze, a very, very mild glaze, that it's not going to appear too muddy, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not going to be distracting in any way. And because that's now wet, I can come back in and even add, like if I decided anywhere that I was like, oh, I need more shadows here, or I even want to add more like tree stuff, then I could do that now. But otherwise, I can just come back in and touch in a couple spots of shadow that I felt like I missed out on. And it'll dry quite blurry because, of course, I just got the whole thing wet. My mountains are bleeding. Can add in a little bit of green here and there. Kind of bring that down the mountain. I should also point out though that if you are using cellulose paper, so it's not 100% cotton, doing what I just did might not be possible for you because cellulose paper is a lot harder to glaze with, and when you're putting that second layer of paint on, sometimes you're actually just picking up whatever was underneath it instead of laying it on top of it, and it's so frustrating. So again, it's just another reason to use cotton paper. Okay, so now these are going to be nice and faded and colorful back there. I'm going to let those dry. I'm not going to touch those anymore. But I want to do a similar color to what I just did on my left mountain. It's kind of like a warm gray. This music though. I like doing these warm elements in the painting if I know I'm going to have a lot of green or cooler elements elsewhere. Just kind of helps balance it out a little bit. I think I'll leave a little white showing through on this mountain just to add that emphasis that it's really bright. The sun is hitting that rock, but not a ton. I'm just using there's like hardly any paint or water left on my brush at this point. And you can see it's showing through. That paper is showing through there. It looks so sunny. You mean you're painting? Yeah. Well, if that's what you're going for, then yay. Just adding a tiny bit of blue to the shadowy parts while it's wet, so it'll kind of bleed. Just give me a little more variety. At the base of that color I just added, I'm going to add a hint of green so that it starts like bleeding up into them. It's kind of more of a warmer green, but it's very light, and I'm hoping that it'll just fade. Up into there. I'm reserving my darker green and my cooler green for the shadowy areas in these foreground pines, because it'll give a nice contrast compared to these bright backgrounds. And as you can see, I'm just like twitching my brush, letting like little pieces of color fall onto the paper. I'm not doing any particular shape. Because this part is kind of just these background areas are just like the supporting elements to the painting. They're important, but they're not supposed to steal the show. I mean, the overall effect of the scene, everything is important, right? But, you know, it just, I want the focus to be the more of this middle area, I think, with the trees coming in, being like popping out against the background. Kind of like in this one where you see the silhouetted tops of those trees against the mountain. I just feel like it just emphasizes everything. Feels like we're painting in church. Wait, what? This is just a random Epidemic Sound playlist called classical music. I can't even hear it. It's like so light on my side. I will put it acoustic music. There. All right, so zooming back out, see the whole thing again. Are you guys kind of caught up? Do you need me to slow down at all, or are we okay? It's always easier to think, well, I mean, I think about how someone watching this in the future can just pause it and catch up if they need to. But for the live paint-alongs, I'm always worried that I feel like I'm rushing you guys. At this point, if you've made it to this point, we do need to let that dry just a little bit, because the trees that we're going to put here and here, they need to be they have to have like a sharp edge, a hard edge against that background. So if the background's still wet, they're just gonna bleed up into the mountains and it's just gonna ruin our plan. So we have to be a little patient with that part. However, we can do another fun part, which is the middle area, or the foreground grassy area here. So this part and this part where it's just a big field, we can fill that in with our warmish green tone, our grassy tone, and add a little bit of salt, and it'll give us that whatever I showed you earlier, it'll give us that really interesting texture, which is so convenient, and it works really well for fields. Okay, so that's the plan. That's what I'm gonna do. And of course you can wait to do this on yours. You don't have to do it right now, but for me, because I'm waiting for this to dry, it just works out to work on that part. It's okay if I want to work on a different area. So I'm gonna get I am using Diopside Green and Serpentine Genuine. They are both Daniel Smith Primatech colors, and they are both like pretty granulating and very textured when they dry. So they have an interesting texture already, especially on this rough paper. But I'm mixing them together because I want like a slightly warm green, which the Serpentine is very, very warm. You can see it's almost like a sap green, but not as nice. But if I mix it with my Diopside, it kind of just still feels like bright grass. And I'm going to mix a pretty big pile of that, and as I'm laying it in, I might also touch in a hint of like my Hansa yellow here and there just to get like a couple brighter spots, and let it all bleed together. And then as that's drying, we'll put on the salt. Okay? Watercolors don't ruin my plan. Amelia, they do what they want. So I am going to turn my paper a little bit so I can get like a nice sharp edge against this water, and then fill in this area. Pretty much going all the way down to that water. And I'm gonna paint right over that middle tree because I don't really, that's like a silhouetted tree. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to worry about it, is what I'm trying to say. In a couple spots I'm gonna add in a little more of that serpentine genuine because it's that warmish green. And then on this, oh god, I just got so much dark paint on my brush. On this bank here, I'm going to touch in some of my dark green, which is like a perylene green, because it's a nice shadowy green. And then as that's drying, I'm going to touch in my salt, or drop in my salt. Make sure none of it gets up on top of your mountains. So the colors will bleed together. It'll also be affected by the salt, and you can start to see that bleeding happening. That's all good stuff. That all helps. That variety of color and texture is really gonna help. Down by this bank edge, I'm gonna kind of give it more of a rough look because I don't want it to be just pure. I don't like it when it's just too solid. It looks a little bit unrealistic, so I'll just break it up just a hint at the base of that. Okay, and that's doing its thing, so I can work on the left side a little bit. Like a white spot there. Yeah, so on the left side we're gonna do something similar. I'm gonna bring it up to about there, so I'll just put a clear line of water so I remember where to stop. And I'll get my other color mixed. And I already went over the water. I'm not going to go on this area because I don't want to risk it bleeding into the other bank, this grass over here. This is like a cluster of trees over here, so I'm just going to drop in a shadowy color because their trees are going to be on top of that, dropping a shadow, and it just will make sense for it to be in shadow. Sometimes I am really careless with my brush. It's okay. Oh my god! I just dropped my salt shaker almost in my water. It's not a paint-along unless something goes wrong. Okay. Do your thing, magical salt. Magical salt fairies. I'm gonna toss in just like a tiny splash of, I'm gonna cover my mountains though. This This is yellow ochre. Just a little splash of that because I want to hint that there may be some wildflowers or at least some variety. And because there's lots of water there, it's going to stay wet for quite a while. The cool thing is that you can use a sharp tool like a palette knife and draw, I say draw because it feels like drawing, little scratches. And as the paint is drying, or if it's still moving at all, it'll settle into those little scratches and become a little bit darker. And it'll reveal itself more once it dries. At first, it's gonna maybe not even be noticeable. But as it begins to dry, you'll start to see it a little bit more. And this, again, is just breaking up these big grassy areas a little bit more, making it a little more interesting. And yeah, just kind of play with it until you feel like you're good, then wait for it to dry. If I was using much darker like if I was using a blue or darker green in this area, this scratching would really be noticeable. Sometimes the lighter colors don't show it quite as much. Okay, we're getting there, guys. Let me just see if I can adjust this. Oh, it's over here. I think that helps a little. All right. Let me see what else we can do. I think by now we are good to go. We can start working on our little mid-ground tree tops, our foresty areas there. If you don't have a palette knife, what can you use for that technique? Anything sharp. You could use a butter knife, a fork, a prong on one of your forks, I don't know, a toothpick. Like, as long as you can basically dent, you're actually denting the fibers of the paper, so you need something that has firm pressure and can like really impact those paper fibers. You don't have to go too crazy. Like if you stab your paper too hard, you could technically go through it. Or if you're on a paper block like this, if I was pressing really, really hard, you would even see it on the paper below it. So I don't want to do it too crazy. It doesn't take too much. A plastic card. Yeah, you could probably use the edge of a credit card or something. Metal tip of a mechanical pencil. Yeah, you could use like a mechanical pencil, just push the lead in all the way. And then that metal thing that sticks out is going to be perfect. But just be careful that, you know, if you have lead sticking out, it'll obviously show up. And you could get lots of marks, but that could also look cool. It could be something that you like. All right, let's do the next step. Could use a hard fingernail. If you have nice long nails, that could work. Not your fingernail. I've seen people use actual, what are they called? X-Acto knives. What am I thinking of? You know what you guys know what I'm talking about. These things. I've seen people use these where they don't like scratch like this, like cutting the paper, but they'll use it this way from the side, so the flat side is like facing it, and they're literally like scraping the paper. But if you do it too much, you're actually going to scrape the top layer of the paper off, and it will remove everything with it. So just be careful. Cut up an old gift card and use that. Oh, good idea. That's a good idea. Cut it up to whatever shape you need, because they're quite sturdy. All right, my reference photo disappeared. Okay, so for this mid-ground layer, I am going to be using a mix of my diopside green. Here, I'll show you guys on this test sheet of paper. So this is diopside green. It's gorgeous. It's like this deep green. It's a perfect in-between of like earthy olive green and bright grassy green. And then I'm also going to be using my Paintalong green, which is like a dark green, almost has black in it. Looks like it's blackish. So these two combined are my two greens that I'm going to use for my pine trees. And for these mid-ground trees back here, I'm mostly going to stick with my diopside green, so the slightly brighter of my darks. And then as I get closer, so this lone tree here and these tree clusters over here, they're going to be very much darker, so the Paintalong green will be used more. I think that's it. Yeah, let's get started. So in this case, I am going to be looking at these trees as they go up the mountain. So I'll start with a slightly diluted version of that diopside, and I'll use my brush point facing up as the peak of the tree, as the top of the tree. So the cool thing about these brushes, these tight, thin tips, they actually mimic the shape of a pine tree. So it's so convenient that you can literally just tap the paper like that and you end up with all these little points, and they look so much like pine trees, especially if you're just doing a big cluster. You can fill in a pretty big area quickly, and when you kind of step back a little bit, it looks like a forest top. Forest top? It looks like a cluster of trees. Forest top. Is that like a muffin top? But more desirable, because I love being in the forest. All right, I'm going to just do this all the way over to about here. And now you can see how this faded green that goes up into the mountain, which I know it's not coming out so dark on the stream, but this green that we already added that's fading up into the mountain is going to mimic that look of those distant, oh God, of those distant trees kind of cascading down the mountain. And now our foreground trees are going to be a little bit more prominent, a little bit more obvious that they're pine trees. I'm only going to go to about here, so I'm not going all the way down into my grassy fields, just kind of stopping it about there. And in order to kind of end the tree line, so where it touches the field, I'm just going to run a clean brush across that and just kind of let it fade down into the valley a little bit. I just want it to look like it kind of gradually becomes, the tree line becomes a field of grass. And in a couple spots I'm using my Hansa yellow, which is a warm yellow, and I'm just touching in a couple places. Instead of having white spots there, I'll just fill in those white spots with the yellow. All right, so this area back here is You could even use a smaller brush if you need to. If you're afraid that your marks aren't looking distant enough. I'm gonna dilute my green quite a bit if I'm over in this area because it's much further away from me. So, like that. So because these trees are a little bit brighter green, it's gonna look like the sun is pouring into this valley and just illuminating them. And if we added blue or like a darker green, like my perylene green, to any of the clusters, they're gonna feel like, now I'm adding a little perylene green and you can see how dark they are. They are gonna feel like they're more in shadow. So maybe like next to a big rock, or if you felt like there was a place in your valley where the shadows would be covering certain trees, you could add more of that darker tone to them. But just a reminder, the pigment will dry a little bit lighter and less saturated. So depending on how much you're using in your mix, I can't say for you, but like without seeing you work, I can't tell. It's one of those things you just kind of have to figure out as you go. Pretty soon I will be removing my salt. Do you stretch your paper on all your paintings? I don't, because I don't need to if I'm using a paper block. I very often use paper blocks. Or if I'm using loose sheets of paper, I will tape down the edges, but not anything fancy. Like I don't soak the paper and then use the gum tape and like stretch it around a stretcher bar or anything. Nothing like that. I'm so curious to see what color palette you all chose for your paintings. Like if you did more of a bluish tone, or, you know, went with the reference photo more. So curious. Can't wait. Oh, that reminds me. Before the end of the Paintalong, I'll say this again, but each month after the Paintalong, I ask everyone to send me their paintings. Like take a photo with your phone just from above and send me the photo. I will crop it and edit it as needed, and then I make a big collage of everybody's paintings and I share that all over social media. And of course, if you want to remain anonymous, that's totally fine, just let me know. But it's so much fun because you can see all the different color choices and the different unique ways people use texture and like chose how to interpret the reference photo in their own way. It's so fun. It's one of my favorite things about the Paintalongs. So please, please, please send me your painting before you forget. I usually try to post it the Tuesday after the Paintalongs, sometimes Monday, sometimes Tuesday, but I will shoot for Tuesday this time. So you have until like Monday at the latest to send me your painting if you would like to be in the collage. Okay. That's getting there. So now the next step forward, the trees are gonna get a little bit darker. I'm gonna add a little bit more perylene green to them so they're standing more silhouetted, standing out against that background tree line. But I'm not going like pure dark tree yet. That's going to be reserved for this cluster over here. But on this side, they'll still stand out. I was going to point out that even though right now we're doing like very simplified trees, if you want to learn how to do pine trees, like, you know, or at least trees that look a little bit more pine tree bigger trees like that. I also have lots of different tutorials that we used pine trees in on my Patreon, so you can go back and watch those, especially the paintalongs with forests or other mountain lake scenes. A lot of times there'll be like pine trees in front of them, so if you're interested in that, you can go check those out. So yeah, this is pretty much... I still have to paint in my lone pine tree that's standing there in the field. And I just have to make sure this is all dry. It's not dry. Hey, Sir Afro. Yeah, we've been doing the Paintalongs on YouTube for a few months now. Thanks for the snack. Why should I put it on a hill? What is this referring to? This part is not quite dark enough right here, so I'll just add a little more green. And a hint of blue. Oh, okay. Clearly I did not get that. I'm gonna add just a hint of purplish shadow to this up here. Just get a little more shadow effect. Kids book most of the time, I understand. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. Haven't heard of it. Or maybe I have, but I just didn't recognize the name. I don't know. Like maybe I've seen it. Maybe if I saw it, I would recognize it. How you guys doing? You almost ready to move on to... I mean, at this point, I feel like everyone's probably in a free-for-all. But if you are following along still, I'm about to do my cluster of trees on this side. So these guys, and then the lone tree, and then we're pretty much done. I'm still waiting for this to dry a little bit. Oh, but in the meantime, I want to add just a hint of definition to the river. So I'm going to get a darker version of that blue that I used. It's just going to be pretty much straight up blue. I'm mixing like a tiny hint of green into it. And I'm going to use a dry brush technique, which means there's like hardly any water on my brush. And I'm just going to sweep it in the direction of the the movement, the river movement. So following the way that the river's moving. Because it's a dry brush, it's going to like dance across that texture. This is rough paper, which is very, very textured. And you can see that as I go, it starts to reveal itself. But it works really great for this kind of thing because it's just like gonna feel like moving water. I'm gonna soften the edge back here because this is kind of further away. I don't want it to be too prominent. I want most of the texture to be there. And again, under this bank. So that's just like a subtle movement. I didn't have a lot of space to work with on the water, so I didn't want to go overboard with color there. It's a performance art. Ooh, what does that mean, Stephen? Now you got me curious. I think I'm ready. This is my lone tree in the foreground over here. Still pretty small though, so what I do is put the pigment down and then I come back with a clean part of my paper towel. Don't make a mistake at this point and touch, and I'm just gonna dab it once or twice and then add a little more green in any areas that I feel like it needs it. But like I don't want it to be a solid looking tree. I want it to be slightly less intense, but I just like how the paper towel gives it a little texture. And then underneath we're going to add a shadow, or I'm going to add a shadow. I mean, you don't have to add this tree. I just kind of liked how in the reference it was just like this lone tree in the grass. Although sometimes, like now that I've done this, I'm like, oh, it would be kind of cool if there were like a couple more. Like I almost want to add one here. So you can make your decision as you go. If you like it, if you don't like it, you only have like a couple seconds if you don't like it to remove it, but I'm gonna add just like a tiny, tiny hint of yellow to the right side of this tree. I feel like the sun would be hitting it pretty hard. Paintalong at some point. Looking forward to June's. I can plan it better. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we haven't decided when the June one is yet or what we're doing yet, but we'll have to come up with that soon. I'm always open to suggestions about what we're doing next. I'll do my just doing like side to side twitchy marks with my brush, coming out of like the base shape.
Even if I'm falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs. You can say I lost my mind, I will keep on holding my head high. Even if the sky is falling down. Jumping from cliffs so high, trusting our wings to fly. Sometimes we're crashing down, but we get up and start from the ground. And I really wanna know if I'll ever figure out where the road goes. Even if I'm falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs.
Can I cheat and add the lone pine with gouache? You can do whatever you want. It's not cheating. Don't let anyone make you ever feel like you're doing something wrong or cheating. I mean, obviously, if you are literally tracing someone else's art and claiming it as your own, that's not cool. But otherwise, there are very few things you can do that are wrong with art. Especially when you're learning. I mean, God. Watercolor is hard enough as it is, let alone, you know, like following some arbitrary expectation about what you can and can't do. Like, do what you need to do to learn. That's how I see it. Everyone learns differently and can utilize so many different tools and techniques. Look at it this way. If an artist who has worked with DreamWorks and some of the biggest names in the design and art and gaming industry, who teaches thousands of students worldwide how to paint with watercolor and gouache, if that person uses white gouache mixed with their watercolor to create their gorgeous paintings, and it's okay, then I am giving you full permission, Steven, to do whatever you want in your painting. And if you don't know who I'm talking about already, that person, the artist that I'm talking about, his name is Nathan Fowkes, and he is like one of the most amazing landscape environment artists. Not even that, he like does portraits and everything too, but this person is amazing in so many ways. And even in his schoolism class, he talks about how he loves combining white gouache with his watercolor because it kind of gets like the best of both worlds, and how he shows how he utilizes that strategy in his paintings. So there. All right. At this point, we can keep going with little details here and there and just work on, you know, I don't know, just depends on how much detail you guys want to get in your paintings, but I am getting close to the end of mine, so I'm gonna kind of wrap it up, I think. If you guys would like to continue on with yours, but you still want to be in the collage, don't forget to send it to me like the end of the day, Monday at the latest. I am going, oh, that reminds me, I mentioned this earlier, but in those of you who are my patrons or my Twitch subscribers and you're in Discord, we are going to do a movie night after this. So we're going to take an hour break. We're going to go make dinner or whatever you need to do. And then we'll come back and do movie night. We're watching The Hobbit. I'm so excited. We're watching the first one, and then we might continue on, or we could watch the other ones at a later time, but yeah. My salt is still a little bit wet right here and right here, but I will remove it once it's dry and take a photo of it, and obviously it'll be in the collage so you guys can see the final result of that texture. But even if I show you zoomed in a little bit, you can see, excuse me, how that salt is pushing that paint, and it's gonna feel kind of like a little wildflower patch or a grassy field. It just adds a lot of variety and texture to that surface. My edge over here is like way too hard, way too harsh. My Paraline green is quite a staining color, so once it starts drying, it's really, really hard to remove it, and sometimes impossible. But I just need to get a little bit less there and soften that a little. All right, I guess I am going to call it there. I may come back and just do like teeny tiny little touches, like, you know, remove the salt and see if there's any other little details, but I feel like this was good enough for the Paintalong, because by now I've pretty much showed you the main steps to get here, and you can always just keep going with your detail. But thank you all so much for joining me. I didn't really see any questions towards the end, but if you do have a question, feel free to message me, email me, tag me on social media, whatever. I'm more than happy to help. And I mean, I can't always answer every question, but I try. Send you my painting. Yay, I can't wait to see it. Awesome. I hope you guys had fun. I thought this was really relaxing. A nice way to spend Saturday afternoon. So as a reminder, I will be back on Monday. I'm going to be streaming on Twitch. It's going to be my longer stream, so hopefully like 6 hours. If you enjoy painting mountains and you want to keep going, I just posted another like mini class on Skillshare. I painted this scene and walked you through everything step by step, so you can get that over on Skillshare, and you can use my link in the description for 2 months free, which is pretty cool. Or you can just download it on Gumroad. I think it's like a $5 on Gumroad, so you can own it forever. Up to you. But yeah, I guess we're gonna call it a day here. I will see you guys again soon, and stay inspired, or at least try to, because I know it's weird times. All right, guys, have a good night. I'll see you next time.